Okay, moving on to the last and final segment of today's show. We just finished up recapping each team in the NFC North draft and how I think they did on that. And we're going to be ending today's show talking about each team in the NFC North and how I think they're going to do this season and what exactly my outlook is for their season. We've done this with every division in football, and today is going to be the last segment. We will be doing that. So without further ado, here is my breakdown of all four NFC North teams. And the first team we will be starting off with today is Matt Patricia and the Detroit Lions. And I think this is just such a big season for Patricia in Detroit because when you look at the Detroit Lions, right, they haven't won even dating back to before when Matt Patricia got there. Since they've taken Matthew Stafford with the number 1 pick in the 2009 NFL draft, the Lions haven't really won anything, and he's led them to the playoffs a couple times. Staff has obviously had some bad luck when you look at that playoff game in Dallas, that pass interference flag that got picked up. But the last 2 seasons, the Detroit Lions haven't been that close. And I think when you look at last season closer, there were a couple things that went wrong for the Lions. Early in the season, the first game of the season, of a matter of fact, they had that tie against the Arizona Cardinals. And if you remember that game, any Lion fan should, they were up big in that game, and the Cardinals ended up coming back, and the game ended in a tie. And I do think, and I really believe, that if that game doesn't end in a tie and the Lions just hold their lead and win, last season could have ended very differently for the Detroit Lions. As I said during the draft recap, they have an offense that should be really good when you look at Stafford and Swift and Carrion and Galladay and Hawkinson and Marvin Jones and an improving offensive line. I think that unit should be very good. You look at the defensive side of the ball, Matt Patricia has won multiple Super Bowls as a defensive coordinator. So if he really makes that big of a difference, this Detroit Lion team should at least be pretty solid and make the playoffs. This team hasn't been good in a long time, and once again, the main issue I've heard with Matt Patricia is that sometimes a lot of players don't really respect him and how aggressively and how fierce his leadership style is, and it's easy to do that when you're Bill Belichick and you have 6 rings, but when you're Matt Patricia, sometimes I think you still have to kind of earn the respect of your players. And the NFC North, I think, is a very competitive division. I wouldn't be shocked if any of the 4 teams in that division end up making the playoffs. I don't really know how many other divisions around the National Football League you could say that about. I mean, I think the NFC West is one, even though I'm pretty down on the Rams. And really, besides that, there isn't really a division I could say that for. But I think with this NFC North, all 4 teams are under pressure. Detroit and Chicago, if they don't win, the heat is going to be on their coach, and their fans really aren't going to be happy. And Green Bay and Minnesota both made the playoffs last year, and they are both expecting to improve on their season. So in the NFC North, Detroit right now would be most people's predictions to finish in last place, and I'm not saying that I disagree with that, but at the same time, if that does happen, Matt Patricia and his staff could be in trouble because they haven't won since they've gone to Detroit. This was a situation that when it was integrated, they and a lot of people expected the Detroit Lions to be able to win right away, and unfortunately, they just couldn't really be able to do that. But it's a big season. We'll see what DeAndre Swift could do. We'll see with some of the upgrades on defense, like bringing in Jamie Collins and Danny Shelton, both guys from New England. We'll see if that will be able to help improve things as well. But Detroit is in an interesting spot going into 2020. Okay, moving on to the next team on this list, we will go to the team that actually won this division last year, and that would be Matt LaFleur, Aaron Rodgers, and the Green Bay Packers. And looking at Green Bay, I think Matt LaFleur and his staff, they do deserve some credit for last year. I didn't expect the Green Bay Packers to be nearly as good as they were, and they ended up finishing 13-3. I also understand that they took advantage of a pretty easy schedule. They beat the Kansas City Chiefs when Pat Mahomes wasn't playing, and that was their best real win of the season. They did beat Minnesota twice, including one big Monday Night Football victory on the road, so I'll give them props for that. But at the same time, I feel like Green Bay, when we look at their roster on paper, we should automatically be associating them with the New Orleans Saints and the 49ers and the Cowboys to a lot of people as some of the top contenders in the NFC and teams most likely to make the Super Bowl in the NFC. And I feel like the Packers, even though they are expected by a lot of people to be pretty good, they are a lot of boomer bust potential with them, and that's what a lot of people are saying them, and that's how a lot of people are judging them. And there are many reasons why. I think one is obviously everything that went down with the draft. I'm not saying Jordan Love was the right or wrong pick necessarily, but at the same time, Green Bay was in the news a lot, and to the casual football fan, that pick is kind of going to look like, okay, what the hell is this organization doing, even though that may not actually be the case, and sometimes the media rumblings gets in the way. But from a football perspective, this Green Bay Packer defense was really good last year. That's what a lot of people don't realize, is the main reason why the Green Bay Packers improved so much in 2019 was really because of their defense. Between the two Smiths they brought in, between Kevin King at corner, who played really well. They did lose some guys, including two of their linebackers, Blake Martinez and Kyler Fackrell, both going to the New York Giants. But they still have both Smiths there. They still have Kenny Clark on the defensive line. They also still have Darnell Savage at safety, another season of him. I'm looking forward to see how his game improves. Kevin King, they still got at corner. Another young corner stud that I love for them is Jair Alexander, one of the better young corners in all of the National Football League. So it's going to be an interesting season for Green Bay. I mean, I think if they don't get to the Super Bowl, it's going to be a disappointing season. The problem is, I just don't necessarily know if this team is ready to get there, even after being one win away from that accomplishment last year, because Aaron Rodgers just still doesn't really have any weapons. They still have one of the better offensive lines in football. They finally have a running game with Aaron Jones, which is something Aaron Rodgers hasn't really been able to do since he's been the quarterback of Green Bay. Like, you can't really remember the last time the Packers has really established a running game. And that goes into just the overall conversation about all of the skill position players in Green Bay. They haven't done a good enough job surrounding Aaron Rodgers with the proper playmakers. And I think that's a real issue that the Packers are going to have to look for heading into next season. Okay, moving on to the next team in the NFC North we will be talking about. That will be Kirk Cousins and his Minnesota Vikings. And I think when you look at the Minnesota Vikings, last year, I will give them credit because they did do a really nice job of proving people wrong. There were not many people at all that expected them to go into New Orleans just like they did and win that playoff game. And that was definitely the biggest throw of Kirk Cousins' career when he hit Adam Thielen deep down the right sideline, getting the Minnesota Vikings into the Saints' backfield and end up winning the game. And Minnesota, when we were talking about their draft, I complimented their draft, and I definitely do. I like what they did. But at the same time, the Minnesota Vikings did lose a lot on their defense. You know, I love Danielle Hunter. I love Anthony Barr, Eric Kendricks. I think all those guys are possible impact players on the defensive side of the ball, no doubt. But the thing is, this defense just lost a lot. And even though they did a nice job drafting their replacements, it is always easier said than done replacing those guys. And last year, Minnesota was pretty solid. I think you really saw the difference in their team when Dalvin Cook is in and out of the lineup. That game I mentioned, that Monday night game against the Green Bay Packers, all Minnesota Viking fans will properly tell you that Dalvin Cook did not play in that game. And I do believe that did have a big impact on why the Vikings ended up losing that game. But at the same time, they did show you the potential by going into New Orleans and winning. And hopefully bringing in Justin Jefferson to go along with Adam Thielen and Kyle Rudolph and another kid I love, Irv Smith on the Minnesota Vikings. He's a former first-round pick, the tight end from Alabama. I think he's going to have a breakout season. That's a pretty good start. Their offensive line is also improving. I love the kid they drafted, not this past year, but the year before that, Garrett Bradbury, the center out of NC State, one of the better younger offensive linemen in the National Football League. And I think if Mike Zimmer and his coaching staff decide to build the offensive line around him, they will be in a pretty solid shape. But an offensive line is, one of the more important parts of a football team. And we all know when you don't have a good offensive line, that is always a possible recipe to failure. And Kirk Cousins was up and down, but I think that's kind of what Kirk Cousins has established himself since he's gotten in the league. He'll have his good moments, he'll have his bad moments. I just question, is Kirk Cousins good enough to lead you to a Super Bowl? And a lot of people, when I did my top 5 coaches that have never won a Super Bowl that are closest, I put Matt LaFleur on the list, and I didn't put Mike Zimmer on the list. And I did that for a reason. And that reason is, I don't know if I could see Kirk Cousins ever winning the Minnesota Vikings a Super Bowl. And it's unfortunate, but I just think it's the case. And even though this roster is plenty talented to do so, Kirk Cousins did it once in that playoff game against New Orleans. I need to see him do it on a more consistent basis. And even though I think the Vikings personnel 1 to 53 should be pretty good, I always have a hard time trusting that franchise. Okay, moving on to the last team who we will be going over, and that will be the Chicago Bears. And most of you guys remember, I actually picked the Chicago Bears to win the Super Bowl last year. And unfortunately, that prediction didn't really come true, as not only did they not even come close to making the Super Bowl, but they didn't even make the playoffs, and Mitch Trubisky really did take a step back. And when you look at this Bears offseason, their main big move was bringing in Nick Foles. And it's going to be very fascinating to see how exactly this Bears quarterback situation breaks down, because Mitch Trubisky is, after this season, going to be a free agent if the Bears don't take his fifth-year option, and Ryan Pace has made it known that he doesn't plan on doing that. And I'm going to be curious to see if the Bears, how exactly do they manage their quarterback situation? And then once they realize that Mitch Trubisky isn't the answer, how quickly do they pull the plug on Nick Foles? Personally, if I were the Bears, how I would manage this is probably I would start Trubisky to start the season, maybe give him a month worth of game action. And then once you realize that he's not the answer, if things aren't working out, then you end up going with Nick Foles. The thing about Nick Foles that not a lot of people realize is this dude has never started a full 16 games in his career. And in Chicago, if you're asking him to do that and expect this team to win right away, like a lot of Chicago Bear fans are doing, I just don't know if that's really the proper expectations to have. But at the same time, I still do think this defense is good enough to win right now. They are still one of the 2 or 3 best defenses in all of the National Football League. Even though last season really was not good for Matt Nagy, going into year 2, I was very high on Matt Nagy. I thought he was one of the better coaches in the National Football League, but unfortunately for him, it really didn't end up that way last season. And now when you look at the Chicago Bears, it's an interesting season because there is a lot of pressure on him. We don't think he has the quarterback to win right away, but at the same time, I don't think that quarterback necessarily needs to do that much to win. Not only do the Bears have a really good defense, but I actually like their skill position players. David Montgomery is a very underrated running back, and I think he's going to have a breakout season this upcoming season. I love Allen Robinson as your top wide receiver. Maybe they'll need another weapon or two. They bring in Jimmy Graham. They draft the kid, Kmet. They also have Anthony Miller. They lose Taylor Gabriel. But the Bears do have some options. So with that defense, I just don't think they really need their quarterback to play great in order to win. It's just going to be curious to see who exactly that quarterback is and how far he could lead them. And their coach, a lot of pressure just falling on the coach. Matt Nagy was awesome during his first year, but last year, you remember that game against the Chargers when I believe it was like a 40-yard field goal with like 15 seconds left, and he just knelt on the ball, let time run out, didn't even attempt to get closer. Pinheiro ended up missing the kick, and the Chargers ended up winning the game. It's things like that where I do kind of get a little worried about the Bears, along with the tough division, but the bottom line is their defense is still very good, and I'm going to be fascinated to see how exactly Chicago does this upcoming season.